Well, welcome. I know we're going to have people trickling in throughout, but I think we should get started. Thank you for attending this Read Brave event. I'm Marika Stalak. I'm the Youth Services Coordinator for the St. Paul Public Library, and it's so great to have you all here. Read Brave is St. Paul Public Library's annual citywide program that encourages youth and adults to read and come together around a young adult novel and encourage that intergenerational dialogue that happens when we bring people together around the thought-provoking contemporary issues that face teens today. And it culminates with an author visit. So we're lucky enough to have Kekla Magoon here with us today. This program is made possible by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. I'd like to give a special thanks to our partners who help make this happen, specifically St. Paul Public Schools, the Addendum Bookstore, and many other partners, Parks and Recreation and the libraries. All of us work together to make sure that this happens. And then any teachers in the room, there are clock hours available for your participation tonight. The 2015 Read Brave book was How It Went Down, and I'm going to let Theresa introduce the author, Kekla Magoon. But let me tell you a little bit about Theresa. Theresa Neal is our moderator tonight. With more than 36 years of educational experience, Principal Neal began her career as a school social worker where she counseled students and enlisted community resources to assist them through the extra challenges. This position set her on a path toward helping students no matter their strengths or their challenges. Before Como Park Senior High School, she served as principal for the correctional school programs that include Boys Totem Town, the Juvenile Detention Center, and Transitions for Success. She has also served as principal for Journey Secondary School, River East Community School, as well as other alternative care and treatment programs within the St. Paul Public Schools. In her role, she supported students to become engaged student learners and supports them to become active and contributing members of their community. She's actively promoted the importance of preparation beyond high school by assisting the students in gaining volunteer and paid work experiences and preparing them for careers after their high school. Principal Neal's focus on community is what drives her approach to educating students through real-world opportunities. So we're really happy to have her be our moderator tonight. So please help me welcome her and our other panelists.
Well, thank you, and good evening to all of you on this cold winter night. But you are going to be in for a warm surprise, and I am humbled that I was asked to participate in this evening, and I look forward to our rich and robust and lively discussion. So before we get into the thick of things, what I'd like to do is introduce the esteemed panelists here. And so if you'll just bear with me, and I don't know if you've all had a chance to grab one of these. I think, America, you grab mine. I'm going to tell you just a little bit about them, and there is so much more than what is here, but you'll get a chance to get a sense of that this evening. So I'm going to start with, to my left is Marjorie Grevious, and Marjorie is Director of Advocacy at Penumbra Theater. Marjorie works at Penumbra Theater to create dynamic and engaging programming that complements the work of the theater as a tool of activism towards uniting and empowering communities towards positive change. Prior to her time with Penumbra, Marjorie worked with at-risk youth and their families for over 15 years. She worked at the Bridge for Youth as a family counselor, and most recently as the program director for Amicus Youth Services, where she led 2 teams serving young people involved with the Juvenile Justice Center in Hennepin and Ramsey County. So let's welcome Marjorie. Thank you. And I'm going to skip the author and save her for last, and then I'm going to move on to Salim, to Sergeant Omari, who is a sergeant with the SPPD training unit. And Sergeant Omari is a Minnesota native who believes in serving people. With 11 years of law enforcement experience, he serves by actively engaging the lives of victims of crimes, as well as trying to reduce crime through various manners to include prevention, intervention, and enforcement. Salim believes in reaching out and touching the community as a means to build sustainable relationships. Salim's experience with the St. Paul Police Department includes 5 years in patrol as a beat officer in the Frogtown community, where he began to build the relationships that he still maintains today. After patrol, Salim works as an investigator in the FORCE unit, which stands for Focusing Our Resources on Community Empowerment, as well as the St. Paul Police Department's gang unit. Salim is currently a sergeant in the training unit, and in addition to Salim's professional experience, he is a 2013 graduate of the University of St. Thomas's Police Leadership and Administration Master's Program. Welcome, Sergeant Salim. Sitting next to Sergeant Omari is Mark Redding, who is also a sergeant with the SPPD. Mark Redding is currently a sergeant with St. Paul Police Department and has been a police officer for over 24 years. He has been with the St. Paul Police Department for 15 years. Prior to that, he worked as an officer with the Roseville Police Department for 6 years and the Airport Police Department for 3 years. At the Roseville Police Department, he was certified as a DARE instructor and worked at as the gang liaison with St. Paul Police. He is currently assigned to the St. Paul Police Department's gang unit as a supervisor and investigator. His duties as an investigator include investigating gang crimes, identifying gang members, assisting other police officers and departments, interviewing, photographing, and talking to gang members. He has been involved in gang investigations for over 14 years, both as an investigator and as an instructor. And he has been an instructor at several Asian Gang Investigator Association conferences, Midwest Gang Investigator conferences, the St. Paul Police Academy, and St. Paul Public Schools Teacher in-Service workshops. He is currently a board member of the Asian Gang Investigators Association and a member of the Midwest Gang Investigators Association, MGIA. I welcome our Sergeant Redding. Thank you very much. Thank you. Sitting next to Sergeant Redding is Mr. Tim Simmons, Sr., who's a community and youth worker with St. Paul Parks and Recreation. Tim has 30-plus years of youth work experience. He was born and raised in St. Paul, Minnesota, attending St. Paul Central High School, and later receiving his GED. He worked various jobs, including CYAT youth camps, community youth outreach worker, Loft Teen Center, and MSP International Airport. Tim worked with the St. Paul Parks and Recreation Department from 1997 to 2000, and returned in 2007, where he claims is the best decision he has made. He is currently the Community Recreation Specialist at Dayton's Bluff Rec Center and was recently hired as the new title, Community Youth Worker. Tim works as a community ambassador with the YWCA, focused on youth work. He is a sports official with the Municipal Athletics, MYAS, and AAU Spring and Summer Leagues. Tim is a guest speaker at the University of Minnesota Youth Studies class. He's mentored youth in transition members and volunteered as a coach in both football and basketball. And we welcome Tim. Okay, did I skip?
Yeah, you skipped.
I skipped? How could I skip you, Stevie? We have a long history, so I'm sorry about that, Stevie. But it's Steve. So I'm going to, before I get to Jason, I'm sorry, Steve, I didn't see you. Steve Randall. Steve is a community youth worker with St. Paul Parks and Recreation. Steve was born and raised in St. Paul, graduating from Mechanic Arts High School. He has 30-plus years of youth work experience, including 15 years with the Boys and Girls Club and 20 years with St. Paul Parks and Recreation. He was a co-founder of Youth in Transition, a program designed to help young men make positive choices instead of turning to the streets. He has been involved with the Leadership and Mentoring Academy with the County Attorney's Office through the nonprofit organization 180 Degrees. Currently, Steve works on community and youth outreach through the YWCA's Community Ambassador Program, where he acts as a go-between for community youth and the local police, helping young people resolve issues without police intervention. Steve works closely with the Youth Studies program at the University of Minnesota, and Steve has done much of his youth work at Dayton's Bluff and at Arlington St. Paul Rec Center, where his most recent home base is now being Wilder. Steve helped to turn these centers into functional, safe places for young people. Welcome, Steve, and thank you. All right, down at the end there, Jason Sowell. Jason Sowell is a former drug dealer, member of a notorious street gang, and a 3-time convicted felon. He joined a gang and turned to a life of crime to gain a lucrative position of authority and financially improve his life. As a result, Sowell was incarcerated in numerous correctional facilities. He turned his life around by earning both his Bachelor of Arts and Master of Science degree in criminal justice. He is currently finishing his dissertation to complete his doctorate in public safety with specialization in criminal justice. Jason is an assistant professor at Metropolitan State University. He is a national keynote speaker and gang trainer, including serving as a national trainer for One Circle Foundation. Through his firm, Jason Soul Consulting LLC, he offers juvenile and criminal justice agencies the tools they need to influence people affected by delinquency, incarceration, poverty, and other social ills. In addition, he is a 2013 Bush Fellow who is focusing on reducing the recidivism rate among juveniles throughout the state of Minnesota. And we also welcome Jason. And certainly last but not least, all of you are our guest of honors, but we are welcoming her to our wonderful city of St. Paul, Kekla Magoon, who is the author of How It Went Down. Kekla is the author of 6 young adult novels, How It Went Down, The Rock and the River, Cameo Girl, 37 Things I Love, Fire in the Streets, and X, a novel written, is it Alasa Shabazz. How It Went Down received a Coretta Scott King Honor from the American Library Association and was included in the YALSA Best Fiction for Young Adults and Quick Picks for Reluctant Readers list. Kekla is a 3-time NAACP Image Award nominee. She also writes nonfiction on historical topics. Raised in a biracial family in the Midwest, Kekla now teaches writing, conducts school and library visits nationwide, and serves on the Writers' Council for the National Writing Project. Kekla holds a BA in History from Northwestern University and a Master in Fine Arts in Writing from Vermont College of Fine Arts. You can visit her online at www.keklamagoon.com. Welcome our guest, Kekla. So tonight is we call it a panelist, but this is really going to be a rich dialogue and discussion. My esteemed colleagues sitting here certainly have words of wisdom, pearls of wisdom to share with you, but we also know that out in the audience, you all also represent wisdom. And we hope that as we have this conversation that you will join in. We just have a couple of norms. One is that you are actively engaged, and sometimes actively engaged is that you just are attentive to the conversation that's going on. And we ask that you figure out how that active engagement looks for you. We ask that you stay personal, local, and immediate with that we really ask that you bring that to who you are and where you are in terms of your questions. And our guests will do the same thing. And I'm going to ask that at the very end, we may walk away here by having to accept that there is really no closure, that we really don't have the answers to that. And so we have to accept and expect that there may be non-closure in this conversation. But what I can tell you is that it will be rich, it will be robust. You couldn't have found a better place to spend your time this evening than right here at Arlington Hills. And so we're going to get started. And although I'm the moderator, we certainly, if you have questions during the course of the panelists are talking, if you feel comfortable, just raise your hand and we'll give you the mic, or you can come up to the mic. If you'd like to write your question down, we have someone that will pick them up and we'll read those, and then we'll ask any one of our panelists to respond. Okay? Any questions? All ready? We're all ready. Ready, panelists? Okay. So, when we look at that book, it certainly talks about community. And so I want you to think about what community means to you. Okay? Take a second. Okay? And how community is outlined in the book, How It Went Down. Talk to me about what a strong community looks like. What's a rich community look like? And is there a community that we can all feel attached or tethered to that might have troubling incidents? So I'd like for any one of you to respond to that sense of community. Anybody want to start? And I'll ask you to think about how that community might relate to the community that you read and How It Went Down.
Is it on? Okay. I think community is having a level of acceptance and appreciation of people, whether they're doing well or struggling, but having a sense that we're all doing it together, not one person is better or one family is better or one group of people is better, just a sense that we're all trying to get something accomplished together. Having a sense of uplifting humanity rather than judging and having prejudices towards others, just being in community, being in unison, helping, assisting, just loving the people just because they're people, not because they have a title, not because they have certain things, items, but just loving everybody in the community, whether they're doing well or not. I think that's what community is. Whether you're my child or someone else's child, I still love you the same.
Thank you, Jason. Anyone else want to respond?
I'll go and say, community to me is when down the block they know your name, they know your parents, they know when you got in trouble, and they sit back and say, you know what, you're gonna get it when you get home, that's a community to me. And in understanding this book, it was like everyone knew each other in that community. They knew who T was, Tariq was. They knew the shop owners. It was like that sense of community that we always had, and based on that community, it's whereas one another. Go off of what Jason said, whereas if you're rich, if you're poor, you can go to your neighbor, borrow some sugar. That's a community where you know one another and you understand one another. Regardless, you're not being judged.
I'm vibing with Jason and Tim. When I think of community, I think of what my dad always said about it takes a village to raise a child. And I picture that village being a bunch of parents, a bunch of aunts, a bunch of uncles, regardless of their actual bloodline. I look at the shop owner as being an uncle. I look at the teacher as being another mother for you. And really what hits home for me, what Jason said, is everyone is loving and looking towards your best well-being. And that's what community is. Helping that next person to move towards what you would want for your child if that person was in your village raising your child.
I think that when I hear the word community, I think about a shared sense of place and purpose of the people who share in that place. I think that came out in a really big way in the book. In talking to Kekla before we got started here, she pointed out that she did not name the place that the story takes place, but I recognize that neighborhood as a place that I grew up in. I recognize the characters in that book with people that I grew up with and around, and that community was very, very familiar to me.
Well, I really like that as a first question, because as an author, it was one of the questions that was in my mind as I sat down to work on this book is thinking about community and thinking about, in particular, how people support one another, how people band together in the face of a tragedy, and how people in some ways are shaken up by a tragedy. In case there's anyone who has not read the book, it is about the shooting death of a black teenage boy in his neighborhood. Tariq Johnson is shot by a white man named Jack Franklin, and there are lots of witnesses to this incident, but there are lots of different perspectives on what exactly happened and why this shooting occurred. And as you can imagine, it echoes some things that have happened in our country, certainly recently and historically. And so in hearing people talk about these issues, I found that we were missing that sense of community from the conversation about these types of shootings and these types of tragedies. And so I was really interested in in how people respond emotionally and individually to a tragedy in their midst, and how they do band together to support one another. How does the village respond when one of the children that they're raising has been taken in this way? And so that was definitely sort of in the forefront of my mind. How do we to paint a picture of people as individuals and people coming together? Because I certainly echo what you're talking about in terms of community. People know each other, people support each other, people sometimes don't get along, and how do you deal with all of those different personalities coming together that all want to be for the same purpose, who all want something as a unit.
And all of you have certainly responded in a way of where there's hopefulness for the community. One of the things that I'm going to challenge you on then is, how do we respond to the complexities and the crisis within the community? And particularly, let's bring that closer to home within this Payne-Phelan community, which I think all of you have had some relationship with. What are some of the complexities of this community that resonate in Kekla's book? Come on in.
I think one of the things is that, especially like when you're talking about the community, there's all these different layers. And I think that even like when you relate it back to the book, everybody in those layers has their opinion of how things should go or how things should be dealt with. And I think what was really good about this book is that even though everybody knew the kid, everybody, the thing that they had, if you had something negative about him, that came forward, or if you liked him, that came forward. And I think that even in a community like this, when stuff happens, everybody has a different opinion about what is going on or what they see or how it should be dealt with. So I think personally that even with looking at that book and reading that book, I could see Payne Avenue. I could see what's going on in this community in that book.
I think, I don't think anyone can speak to it like Steve. I mean, he's been working over here for a significant amount of time. But what I've seen, because when I came from Chicago, I lived on the east side. I lived on Minnehaha and Burr. And what I noticed was, there was a lot of personal responsibility placed on the people living in the community without really acknowledging that there were systems that made that existence a reality. We tend to overlook that. We tend to blame the people who are caught up in carrying firearms and, going at each other and having issues as just their problem. And I see that on the east side because I look at St. Paul. There's a lot of resources around the Rondo community. There are a plethora of resources over there. But when you come to the east side, the resources are scarce. And that might be because a lot of people who live on this side are from Chicago, or I don't really know what the reason is. But and on some level, this is a forgotten part of St. Paul. And I think we need to acknowledge that because a lot of these young people want to do well. A lot of them are great people. I love, a lot of these kids, but a lot of them are not given a chance. So sometimes that comes up in conflict, that comes up when they're asked to be expelled from a school and things like that. You see the worst parts of them. And unfortunately, those worst parts make it to the media, and then people begin to judge. One point in the book, a woman was coming into that part of town just to get her hair done. She had all kind of judgment calls based on, on what she thought, her perception, whether it was right or wrong. So I see a lot of the things, a lot of the components of the book going on right amongst us.
So the book resonates multiple themes. There are themes of violence. There's the themes of grief and loss. The themes of the impact of gangs, race, racism, biases. We've talked a little bit about community, but I want us let's focus in a little bit on the impact of violence and how it plays itself out in the book. And particularly violence in the sense of how it impacts the young people by virtue of their loss and their handling or lack of being able to handle grief. So there is a quote from Vernisha, who's the mother of the slain boy, and how it went down. And Vernisha says, "Anger would be more bearable than this sorrow." And sometimes, as a high school principal, and for all of us who have had some level of involvement with young people, our teens often act out in anger because of the sorrow they feel. Can any one of you address this?
I think in my experience of working with young people, an angry outburst or violence or an over-exaggeration of aggression is a physical expression of a deep grief manifestations for which they don't have words, for which they are not equipped either with the proper support systems in their life or the maturity within themselves to face the things that come at them too soon in life. And so it is much easier when home is not right to go to school, a place where there's going to be a limit to how much you're going to be able to get away with, and pick a fight to dump that chaotic energy that you came to school with. You don't actually have anything against a specific person, but you have so much built up within you that you create that situation so that you have a way to express yourself, because in the home there's not a place for you to really work that out or get those pieces figured out. One of the things that I think about with these questions is the concept of a three-legged stool, that young people are sitting on a stool made of community, home, and school. And when any one of those legs of the stool are uneven or are broken, then young people are at risk of falling off, right? And so, part of the work of working with so-called at-risk young people or adolescents in crisis is trying to find a way to balance out that three-legged stool until they develop the tools within to be able to handle these deep rivers of sorrow that many of them face.
I was when I met Kekla, I was telling her, I understood that book because, that Tariq, I lost a nephew close to me at that age, at 16. Of dealing with the sorrow and dealing with the pain, and wanting to act out, of just trying to calm them down of, no, it wasn't right, and it is a, sorrow for them, sorrow for us, and that it was a cold case, and it was a situation where they didn't find who did it, and they had to sit back and, still act off, and me, I had to really do the best I can to calm them down. Friends, family, ones that felt like he was a brother. And understanding this book here, it was a lot, of how it went down. Because I understood how it went down. When I read the first page, it got me going more and more into it, because I was like, I understood. I related to this book because it was a part of my life too, of losing someone like that. And it is hard for the young ones, that we do have to, a pat on the back doesn't do it all, and does counseling help? It can be offered and tried, but we just really, really got to reach out to them and understand and give them a voice and put them in a place where they can let out their anger, but not against someone else, to promote more violence. It's one where we got to figure out how can we let them get out that steam that that they got built up inside of them because they lost a loved one. So I really understood where she was going on when she said how it went down.
But I also think that, when violence happens or things happen, unfortunate things happen in other communities, there's grief counselors, they immediately, in some communities, can get grief counselors in the schools and stuff like that to talk to the kids. But I think what happens in some of the inner city neighborhoods is that when this stuff happens, there's no place for these kids to go to talk about that and talk about how they feel, because people start to feel like, oh, they're used to that. They'll be okay. So then the kids do other things and act out, like Tim was saying, because there's nowhere to put it. So they have to find a place to put it, and then they start to put it onto others. So that, I mean, for me, that's one of the things that I look for is like, what are the answers for the kids that have to live this kind of life?
As I think about this violence issue, whether it be in Underwood or here in St. Paul, first off, so many similarities that Kekla writes about that I experience here in this community in how people view violence, how people respond to violence. In the book, various characters felt differently about, were affected differently by the violence. Working in this community, in Frogtown, the youth here respond to violence so differently. Some people are hugely affected by it, like we saw in some of Kekla's characters, and others almost kind of feel like it's just a part of every day. But I think what we really got to get to is what are these societal factors that are going on in these kids' lives. These aren't crime issues, folks. There's things going on in these kids' lives from an early age that are creating this propensity for violence or for lack of compassion or empathy for each other. And I strongly believe that everyone has the potential to be empathetic and loving. We just have to steer these young men and women in avenues that allow that to surface, allow that positive energy to come out, that positive emotion to come out, rather than veering towards violence. And that's, I think, really where we start coming up with some of these solutions for this stuff, rather than not necessarily getting tough on crime all the time, or now all of a sudden we need to dump money into youth programs that are for housing. We need to work on it an all-encompassing program. So that's just how I feel about the violence piece. If we can start working on those other things, we can really start to reduce that violence.
Can I say something to it?
Go right ahead, Jason. You certainly can.
Well, I think a lot of these kids, are young people who exert violence. I think a lot of them are just hurting. You know the saying, hurt people. And that's why I got into so much trouble. I was really hurting, but people always said, man, you got all this anger. It wasn't really that, but at least when I was angry, I felt like I had a sense of control. When I was sad, I felt like I had no control. So angry felt a little bit better than being sad. So if I was sad about, my father's a heroin addict. I love him, but it can't be a relationship just based on his substance abuse. Having him leave at such a young age, especially being in Chicago and not having him in the home, even as a protector, I was more so angry than sad. My sister dealt with the sadness more, and our behavior showed it. I got into gang violence and different things like that, and she became a teen mom because she was trying to find comfort and all the things she was looking for. So I think there's a direct correlation between being hurt and then hurting other people, and also being sad and then hurting yourself on some level. But a lot of times we often forget that when we see young people who are sad or angry, we don't take enough time to invest in them. We just write them off like, man, you're not going to make it. We say all these things like, man, you're going to end up in jail. You're going to end up dead. And that doesn't help anyone. So the approach should be, I feel you, I understand you, I respect you, I love you. What can I do to help you thrive through all of these systems and help navigate through a lot of these systems? But oftentimes we just say, man, you need to get diagnosed. We give you some medication, hopefully that'll hold you down or whatever. But we always look at the worst rather than the beauty in their struggle. So we need to start identifying that a lot of these young people are resilient. So we need to change the narrative from them being violent or gang members to them being resilient young men, and really men and women, and dealing with or playing the hand that they were dealt, because a lot of them inherited a lot of bad situations, bad households, bad systems, bad policies, bad things like that. So we shouldn't vilify them for some of their decisions. We need to take some of that as well.
Okay. So I'm just going to add one thing to what I've heard say, and then we're going to move on to another theme. Because, Jason, as you talk about systems, and as Marjorie has talked about the three-legged stool, family systems, community systems, and school systems. And so I'm going to put the two sergeants on the spot here. And I just briefly, in terms of the system that you represent, how that is viewed by community, particularly young people, who may not have a trust for the police department. And I know that our local police department truly emphasizes community policing. But I'd just like to get your brief response to representing a system that is not always embraced or trusted by the community, and the impact of how we respond to violence and how we respond to young people who are caught in that system that oftentimes is violent or dysfunctional, or the system that is actually they are the victim of. I hate to put the two of you on the spot, but
I think one of the issues is, I know Salim and I have worked together for quite a while now, and we agree that there's bad policing by a small minority of the group. So that can affect that stereotype on the police. The way, I think there just has to be, you have to be part of that community. You have to be in the community. You have to work with the community. Offer the alternatives for the young kids. And one of the big issues I think that we're dealing with now is, at a young age, especially young boys, they're taught not to show emotion. They're taught, you can't cry. You can't show emotion. So one of the ways that, the only emotion that they can show is anger. And so that's what comes out. That's what kind of they're taught to handle things. And so I think that's where we need to sit down and we talk about those issues. Talk about that it's okay for things to happen and move on from there.
okay, thank you.
That was a pretty complex question.
I know.
But, when we talk, you talk about the system that we represent. First off, I'm very proud of the system that I represent. I'm very proud of law enforcement as a whole. The overwhelming majority of the 613 cops here in St. Paul proudly and selflessly serve.
Can I give some clarity to that? And I'm
Yeah.
talking about the system vocationally, because you are more than just the police officer.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So, as a vocation, as a public servant, as a law enforcer, as however you want to put it, in what context you want to put it in, the system is challenged due to kind of what Mark was talking about here, some of those few bad apples that make poor decisions on our behalf. Also, let's not forget about the history of America, folks. The system still is trying to come over the top of the hill from what's happened in the past. But we also have to be critical thinkers when we think of this system. And I was actually just talking with Cassandra about this earlier. If we take some of the few incidents in the media, the propaganda and the rhetoric that we're hearing about, it's very easy to lump an entire law enforcement group, a system, into one faction, if you will. But if we do that, are we any different than any other racist group, any other group that generalizes, any other group that, are we not persecuting the police the same that we've persecuted different racial groups in the past? So that's something that we just have to think about. As far as how that, the distrust in the community, I own it. It's our job to be better as police officers. We've taken an oath, and we've sworn to that. So it's our job as police officers to continue to challenge one another. It's your job as community members who are truly our employers to continue to hold us accountable. And we have to identify those ways to breach the gap rather than find divide. When there's an incident in the media, it's so easy to generalize our entire police department, but are we furthering that divide? Are we making things better? So let's be critical thinkers. Let's try and get to the root of the problem, and then we have to, at some point, start moving forward rather than just dealing with the rhetoric that's in the media all day.
And so the two of you represent hope, and we'll get to that conversation about hope shortly. So another theme, gangs and racism. So let's talk a little bit about gangs. And in how it went down, Brick, one of the characters, is intent on recruiting Tyrell into the gang. So does that experience resonate with your experiences working with youth? Any of you can resonate with young people who are torn in terms of that, either that movement towards or movement away from gang life? And how can the community do to support those teens who do not wish to join gangs or feeling pressured? So let's start with those two questions, and I open that up.
For me personally, I didn't want to be a part of the gang when I was younger. That was never like something I aspired to be. But when you live in a community that's in destitute, in dire straits, it's like joining the gang seems like the only viable solution. So when I joined, it was for economic reasons. I never wanted to be a part of the violent side of it. I needed money. I needed cash. And it was like it was essentially like working for the only company in town. So I see why a lot of these young people will say, man, yeah, I'll join the gang. At least I got somebody who gonna help protect me. I got somebody who can help me, financially if I need $20, $30, or, I have somebody who can, at least walk with me, down this dangerous neighborhood. It seems like sometimes, these young guys think it's the only way to navigate through these systems. When you can't get a job, it's domestic violence in your home. It's a lot of stress and strain. Sometimes it might seem like a great decision, but the thing is, we don't have enough opportunities for these young people. Not all these young guys can play ball. There's a lot of sports stuff, but for the kid who's highly intelligent, who's not given a chance at school, it's not really much for them. So unless you open up some doors, they're going to start kicking some down. And that's just the way it is. If you look at the history of gangs, the first gang was the 40 Thieves. It was like the Irish couldn't get any kind of employment. The stores would say, need workers. If you're Irish, no need to apply. That's why they created gangs. So, we always talk about gangs, but I'm very careful about talking about gangs because a lot of times it's a lot of race coding. It's like using switch words for blacks or Latinos or Asians. So I think we need to have an honest conversation about gangs. Gangs are the result of being ostracized, of being left like everything taken away from you and you being told to make it with nothing. So that's why you see gangs. If we create more opportunities for these young people and open up some doors and understand that a lot of this stuff is from systemic racisms, from institutions that vilify and close out certain people, then we'll be able to, create a solution, because gangs have been around for forever. And it's like we still haven't figured out a solution.
So thank you, Jason. So with that, Kekla, I'm going to ask you to walk us through what you were thinking as you were developing those characters in that theme around gangs.
Around gangs specifically, okay. So before I was an author full-time, I worked in youth development with nonprofit organizations, in a few in Chicago, but mostly in New York. And one of the organizations that I worked with had a specific mission to offer teen boys and girls an alternative to particularly the sense of belonging that comes from a gang, that sense of family, particularly I think in terms of your three-legged stool analogy, where, if you have, the community in some ways isn't standing up for you, maybe you're struggling in school or the school isn't strong and helping, and if things are going wrong at home and you've got this gang who's going to say, yeah, you're going to get money out of this, you're going to get somebody to protect you, you're going to get some friends, you're going to maybe get a parent figure that you don't have, somebody who seems like a strong person who's taken you under their wing, and they're always going to be there for you. That's what they're promising, you know? And so this organization was working with middle school and high school teens in a kind of rites of passage program to offer kind of a positive gang. And so, you know, so in that experience, working with those teens and talking with those teens, I got a sense of the pressure that they were feeling from different angles. And I don't know, I think, you know, in this book I made it sort of explicit that Brick is sort of trying to recruit Tyrell to join the gang. And you know, Brick is doing it because he wants to protect Tyrell, right? He feels like that's a positive thing from his perspective. But from Tyrell's perspective, this is going to take away all these opportunities that I could have, but it's also going to make me safe in all these different ways. So he's feeling torn about his potential participation. So I was trying to address, I think, some of those issues that I saw the kids struggling with in this organization, about wanting opportunities but not seeing another place to get them, and the sense of sort of like floating through the community, and there's other dangers, right? You know, they have anxiety about the police, they have anxiety about school, and, you know, sort of different kinds of authority, and this feels like in many ways a safe option, even though there's danger involved. And so, you know, so I sort of wanted to present some of those issues and some of these characters, and also to show that some of that, what we were talking about earlier with regard to anger, as an expression of sadness or grief, you know, I tried to show that in Brick and Noodle. I mean, they're very tough guys, but they have their vulnerabilities that I think show at different moments in the book, and so to me it was important to try to look at them as whole people, as round characters, and not just, you know, big tough gang guys, but show a little bit behind that.
All right. So Marjorie, Steve, and Tim, I know that all of you have and continue to be in the trenches in working with youth. Any comments that you would like to make with regards to just this issue of young people and the pressure of how often we talk about gangs and what gangs may emphasize, you know, but your thoughts on that before we move on to our next theme?
I worked for 4 or 5 years in Southern California, in Long Beach, kind of the heart of Crips and Bloods territory, which now have reached a mythological place in American society. And in learning and working in a community like that, you know, one of the things that one of the young people said to me was, you know, my mama says that she would do anything for me, but my boy, he actually took a bullet for me. That's powerful. That is a very powerful thing. When we use the word gangs, for a lot of our young people, that sense of belonging that Kekla spoke to is really what they're searching for and looking for, and someone who protects you and looks out for you and will kick mama some rent money when things get tight. Like, those are really, really powerful things. And so when we look at trying to remove young people from gangs or trying to squash gangs, as so many people on the panel have already spoken to, we have to have something in place for that in the community. We have to have a way to support these families that are struggling inside of communities that are struggling inside of cities like Detroit and New Orleans that are struggling to all hold themselves up. So we have to have we can't just snatch the gangs away. We actually have to have a viable alternative for these young people to live and thrive within.
And I also just think that the kids really got to believe that they're safe. And I, you know, like when I first started doing the youth in transition 8 years ago, you know, I didn't know nothing about gangs, but kids were dying and somebody had to do something. So me and a friend of mine came up with the idea, the concept of youth in transition. And at the end of the day, what it really amounted to was there was two sides and you had to pick a side. And if you didn't pick a side, somebody chose for you. So then if you lived on this side of the town, you were automatically east side. If you lived on the other side, you were Selby side. You didn't get to choose, people chose for you. So kids started to band together for safety. But at the end of the day, when we started doing the stuff with Youth in Transition, it was a bunch of scared kids that band together and said, I feel strong when we're all together. I feel when I'm by myself, I'm scared because they're marginalized at school. We don't know what's going on at home. There's all kinds of things that are happening to these young people, and nobody's saying, I'll put an arm around you and make you feel safe. And then when you try to get them employed, their history sometimes follows them because somebody might say, do you know who you just hired? He's a gang member. Now that kid can't have that job, so that hope just got snatched off from under him. So what do? Go back to what they know. So I think that when, like Jason said earlier, once you label them, it's hard to get off from under that label and to build a sustainable life.
Of kind of understanding Tyrell, you know, of understanding what he was going through, because in a way he was protected by Tyreek, you know, and I kind of understand that and relate because I've never been in a gang, never been involved with a gang, but trying to be recruited by gangs, you know, so I understood, but, you know, the character that where Ty has is, you know, him being soft, him being unsure of what he wants to do, but also being protected. He has people protected around him. And you look at, like I look at the time that I grew up, and you go back to the communities, we had communities that protected us, you know, and that's where we go back to. Our communities kind of protected us and told us, that's not for you, you know. We had friends, our friends were in school, athletic, you know, so we played ball in that. And now today's kids, it's not really like that. You know, the community's not there to protect them. The community is allowing them to go, you know, without saying, we're afraid of our kids these days. So if he's had his pants sagging down and he's doing other things, we're not going out there yelling at him. We're not going out there saying, hey man, that's not for you. You know, like it was done to me and done to a lot of others. You know, so the work now that was done for me, I can do that to a lot of these kids. Hey man, that ain't for you. You got choices, you got opportunities. You know, so it's like saying, based on what I do, how I do my youth work, you know, it's like being their community. When they come around me, I ask them, how you doing? How's everything going? You going to school? That's what we got to start doing with these kids to prevent them from going into these gangs, giving them an option. They feel like they don't have an option. I felt I had an option. You know, my option was, yes, I can go on this side or I can do this. Well, more of my friends was over on this side being positive. Not a lot of my friends is over here. But you look at today's youth, a lot of their friends are affiliated with gangs, so that their option is limited. So now how do we create more options for our youth?
Okay. And so another very resounding theme in the book was race. Multiple perspectives of race, depending on the character that you may have really attached yourself to. And there could be lots of questions that I could formulate about race, because first it's a conversation that makes particularly adults very uncomfortable. Young people, not at all. And what I hope is that in this conversation, we will certainly message to young people the importance of deepening their dialogue and discussion about race. But for the adults here, how do you think the dynamics of race played themselves out in Kekla's characters? And how that relates to right here, right now, East Side, St. Paul? Race makes us think. Yeah.
No, I just want to be careful about how I say what I want to say. Like, well, I'm very comfortable talking about race.
But keep in mind, what we said, one of our norms was keep it personal, local, and immediate. And that, I didn't say it, but I think the reality, and we use it in St. Paul Public Schools in our racial equity work, around we just need to experience discomfort, because race generates discomfort. Mm-hmm. And recognize that we are going to walk out of here accepting that there will be non-closure, mm-hmm. or expecting it, because it is such a paramount mm-hmm. topic. But mm-hmm. when I'm asking you to just, if we can condense that to merging this conversation around the impact that it has on our young people, because this is really about how do we message this for our young people that adults feel comfortable in having conversations with our kids. So I think, so.
Well, I mean, there's a history to it. So, with the kid being killed by a white guy, it's like, here we go again. For me, especially with today being the day that Trayvon Martin was killed, I automatically feel something when I read those things because there's a history behind it. And there's a history of people being able to do it without any kind of consequences. There's a history to that, and that's irrefutable. So for me, when I saw it or read it, I visualized it. Because it's all too common. It's like, here we go again. Like, it's happening. And in that, people going to automatically choose sides. I see it in these days when, you got people saying Black Lives Matter. You got other people saying, no, all lives matter. And it's like people saying police lives matter. People are automatically going to choose a side based on their paradigm, their reality, what they think, what they grew up with, what they know, where they've worshiped, where they spend most of their time, where they work. They're going to go to that common perception, regardless of what the facts say. I spend a lot of time in Ferguson. I go down there because it's like that's important to me. So it's like when I read things like that, automatically in my mind, I think one thing. Here we go again, and that's what I saw in the book. A lot of people going right to what they think, even though it might not be right. For me, it's like it's historical, so I think I know what might have happened here. Somebody felt like they needed to take the law in their hands. They saw a critical incident, and their reaction was to shoot. So you saw people saying he had a gun. No, he didn't have a gun. Same thing with Mike Brown. That same type of Mike Brown situation. Like, was he aggressive? Did he go for the firearm? What happened here? People put things together based on their paradigm, not based on what they see. That's what I saw in the
Thanks
book.
for your perspective, Jason. Anyone else have a perspective on the dynamics of race, of how it played itself out in the book, and or how it may play itself out in this community?
I couldn't agree with Jason more, but the one piece I think that I'd like to add is that just like in the book, she kind of left us hanging, right?
Mm-hmm.
We didn't have all the facts.
That's right.
And again, as responsible critical thinkers, we have to get to that point where we don't put it about race, and it has to be about the facts. What did happen? What didn't happen? And that's where, as we talk about those societal factors that I'd originally spoke about, as we tackle those societal factors, I think we can move from the past and the history and start moving towards factual-based reporting, if it's in the media or whatever it may be, and make decisions based on facts. So the similarity in her book is exactly what we're experiencing today, and in people's minds essentially being made up based on limited information, and race being a big role in kind of veering people towards what they believe.
Thanks, Salim.
But I also think that where the race piece came in for me is the fact that even like for the media, because they deemed him a gang member, it was almost like it was okay that happened. So it's almost like he deserved it. And I think that that's part of the thing that I feel like here in St. Paul, that we're getting that mentality that if we deem them gang members or whatever, then they're less than zero. So then if something happens to them, that's what they get. And then we forget the fact that they're young people and that they're viable human beings. And I think that that's where, for me, the race piece comes in, is that everybody, and then even if you look at the book, he really wasn't a gang member, but everybody labeled him. So I think that for me, that's when I think of the racial piece of that.
If I can comment on that one too, it's interesting to me when people raise that particular point about, does it make it okay, right? Who Tariq was he a gang member? Was he sort of an innocent bystander, quote unquote? It seems to me that's one of the things I think I was trying to to unpack a little bit in writing this book, was that sense of the conversation is so much about bias and so much about identity, sort of about race, but also sort of identity beyond race, right? We seem hungry to figure out who that individual was, and as if that is going to make it okay, right? Like, well, if he had a gun, does it make it okay that this man got out of his car and shot him? Like, I'm not sure it does make it okay, but it seems like we want that answer. We want to know who he was, because somehow that's going to make a difference in how we understand his story and how we, I guess, perhaps justify his death, or can feel certain about the rightness and the wrongness of it. Like, that seems to be part of our question when we think about this in the media. And so for me, writing this, I really did want to explore what kinds of biases people would bring to the story as readers, but also the characters in the story are judging each other based on race, or judging each other based on appearance, or judging each other based on sort of life experience. One of the more extreme examples, I guess, from early in the book is that there's a light-skinned black man, or he self-describes as a light-skinned black man named Brian Trellis, who walks out of a building, and he thinks he hears someone say, "Stop, thief." And he sees a kid running by, dark-skinned kid running by in a hoodie, so he's like, oh, I've got to stop him because he must be the thief, right? And then from another person's perspective, that guy looks like a white guy to him. From another person's perspective, he's actually not yelling "stop thief," he's yelling "stop T," which is the name of the kid. So there's all these different understandings and misunderstandings that happen based on sort of people's unconscious quick biases. And so that was definitely one of the things that comes into play early in the book, and sort of, I think, adds some chaos and confusion to understanding what it is that really happened and trying to get to the facts, because so much of the time we're hearing somebody else's perspective, we're hearing somebody explain, here's what I saw, and we choose to believe people or not, and I think all has to do with bias. It all has to do with how people see each other in terms of race and in terms of other factors.
Does anybody want to have any other comment before I ask the very last question, and then we're going to move towards okay. Anybody have any questions? Okay. Yes, sir. So the question is, there a follow-up? Is that to Kekla?
Yes, it just seems like, you get to the end of the book and it's like, you left me wanting more, or to do, but am I going to get more?
I don't know. I mean, I've thought about doing another book that would be either similar or sort of pick up maybe, a few months later or a year later or something to address a different sort of angle on the issue. I started writing this book in 2012 after Trayvon Martin was killed, and so it's partly based on sort of my impressions of that story and my impressions of sort of the media coverage of that story, and wanting to kind of get behind the headlines and behind the sort of sound bites we hear about these kinds of stories, and wanting to understand it on a community level, on an individual level. What does it feel like to be the kid who sits in science class next to Tariq, and suddenly Tariq's not there, but every night you're seeing his face on TV, and and sort of what is that experience like? I'm seeing it from a national perspective. I'm seeing it from far outside, and not knowing Trayvon Martin, not knowing Michael Brown, but wondering sort of what the people closest to him and those sort of concentric circles that are near to him are feeling, and that sense of community, how the community is rocked, how the community is, the balance of the community is disrupted, and how a community chooses to respond. And so in this book, the community responds in the ways that I saw people responding to Trayvon Martin's case, with a march, a hoodie march, to say, hey, we can all wear hoodies, and you don't need to distrust us. And then what happened in Ferguson after Michael Brown was killed was a totally different kind of reaction, right? That sense of violence coming from a systemic struggle, and nobody's really contextualizing that for people to understand the systemic struggle that leads people to riot, that leads young people to act out in terms of violence. And so I would be interested in exploring that a little bit more in another book, that sense of trying to put some context on that, and trying to, I think, explore the connection between grief and violence. And there's that Dr. King quote, which I'm probably paraphrasing, that talks about violence and rioting as being the last sort of measure of desperation from people who feel unheard, the voice of the voiceless, right? Like, we're standing outside the courtroom, outside the courthouse, and he was not indicted, and, what else can you do? When you've spoken and you've been there and you've fought with words and nobody seems to be listening, like, you sort of feel like you have no other recourse, right? So that issue, I think, would be interesting to explore from this kind of perspective, like looking at different individuals participating in that type of community upheaval and how that comes about, and to be able to explore that a little bit would be interesting to me. But I also feel that the purpose of this story is to leave it a little bit open-ended. There's 18 different viewpoints in this book that share perspectives that diverge. And to me, the 19th viewpoint, which is the reader's viewpoint, is the most important one in the end, because you get to decide what you believe. And that, I feel as a reader, that's quite empowering to a reader, not to necessarily be told the specific answers, but to be empowered to choose what you want to believe. And I know that that's difficult for a lot of people because, well, I think it's difficult for a lot of people because they don't necessarily trust their own judgment or their own ability to make that kind of choice or determination. And so I kind of enjoy putting that challenge to the readers to say, no, really, you get to decide what you think happened. Did Tariq have a gun, or was it just a Snickers bar? Did Jack Franklin get out of the car because he thought Brian Charles was a white guy, or did he see something else? Like, we don't really know. But you get to know, like, in your own certainty, in your own mind. And if that's uncomfortable, I think that that's a good thing for people to kind of work through if they're willing to. That was a really long answer, sorry.
We have a young scholar who has a question here.
If questions can come up here, they can hear it on the...
Do you want to speak at the mic?
Or if panelists want to
We can repeat, sure.
the question as they...
Okay.
My name is Caleb, and how you guys are talking about violence and stuff, if you guys have try to stop it, such as that time here when at Arlington that says we was playing against cops, so next time when we see them and they think we're doing something bad, they'll say, oh, that's Caleb, he's a good kid.
Just to repeat, so your comment was about violence. Since we were talking about violence a lot, you're wondering about things we can do to stop it. And one of the things was, did you got to meet some police officers, or you played a game with them? Basketball? Oh, okay. So you played basketball together with some police officers, so you feel like you know them a little bit now, and they know you, so they can, when they see you in the neighborhood, they might go, oh, that's Caleb. He's a good guy. I played basketball with him. So there's maybe some bridges being built between the police officers and the community by having a fun interaction like basketball. I think that sounds like a really good solution to trying to build some of these bridges that we were talking about. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. So we have a couple of questions here. One was, why was T's little sister's voice written in prose?
Okay. So Tina's voice is a poetic voice. So she has all of her pieces are fairly short. When in the very, very beginning of the book, she is not at the scene when Tariq is killed, but she hears the sirens coming. She doesn't know that it's for her brother, of course, but she has a very short piece. It goes, siren song out the open window, siren song, wee you, siren song, and I squeeze my eyes shut, siren song, fingers in my ears, siren song, make it stop now, sirens mean bad news. And so you, the reader, know that these sirens are coming for her brother. She doesn't know that, and so you hear that. And so many of her pieces are these little moments and kind of pulses, if you will, of her grief and her trying to understand. She's very young and trying to understand the loss of her brother. And I think those poems were little moments of sort of respite for me from the idea of Tariq's death as kind of an issue, right? Capital I issue that we're discussing, because she doesn't understand a lot of that. She doesn't understand the context of racism and class and the fact that he was wearing a hoodie. Like she doesn't totally understand that, certainly at the beginning. She puts it together a little bit as the book goes on, but she's really a very innocent character and very sort of steeped in grief because she's lost her brother, and that sort of intimacy of that, to me, lent itself to poetry in that way.
Okay. The next question, I think, is actually for anyone on the panel. It says, the issues with our kids are directly and mostly the result of poor parenting. And for several generations, kids are raising kids. The parenting skills are not well developed. The question If having a child is a right, should parents lose temporarily their parental rights to correct mistakes when they fail their responsibilities? I know it's hard to determine how, but we need to discuss it. Comments?
Absolutely. We put a lot of the onus on the parents. You know, especially when I was younger, getting in trouble, a lot of people wanted to ask what kind of parent my mom was. My mom was a great parent. She told me all the things not to do, but she wasn't growing up as a black young man in Chicago. She had a different framework, and she grew up in a different era, so the messages just didn't resonate with me. You know, I mean, my mom loved me. My mom, you know, kept a roof over our heads. Sometimes we lived in shambles or, you know, chaos, but my mom was a good parent. So I'm never one to advocate that someone should lose their parental rights, because a lot of times it's the school that shape these young guys. A lot of times they're recruited in the schools. A lot of times it's walking to and from different places that has an impact on them. So I'm not for somebody losing their parental right because the child isn't living up to their standards or living up to what they could be. I just think, like what was mentioned earlier, you know, it takes a village. It takes more than the parents, because if you got a single parent household and the parent works 10 hours a day, it's hard to come home and read to your child or ask your kid about their day or debrief instance they had in the gym room. So a lot of times that kid becomes hardened. That kid makes his own reality, and that kid starts doing things that they wouldn't normally do. So I'm not for a parent losing their rights to children. And we see that a lot with guys who are incarcerated. A lot of guys who are serving time are losing their parental rights for things that had nothing to do with the kid. And these guys have no fight, and they just sit and they watch their rights get thrown away. They don't even go to court for it. So I'm definitely not for someone losing their parental rights. I think, you know, there has to be some kind of family-centered therapy, family-centered initiative before. And if that doesn't work, then you could talk about something else. But I don't want people losing their kids. That has to hurt too badly. And that creates more brokenness. And we don't need any of that. We need more unity. We need to coalesce on a better level.
Thank you. Any other comments from our panel?
I'm going to agree with Jason on that. As far as if there's issues with the kids, there's a lot of different issues going on. And one of the things that we're trying to do right now is not only do we work with the kids, we want to work with the families. And we feel if we can heal that family, it's going to heal the child, and you know, we're going to be one step ahead. So not only should you shouldn't take it, things have to be done for that family, not just, you know, an individual, but the whole group.
I kind of got mixed feelings about this. I agree in that, excuse me, that we should not be taking these kids outside of their homes, because that actually can have a more negative effect. But I am also not letting parents off the hook. There is some really, really bad parenting going on in many instances. But we need it just. I don't know. We need to, without taking these kids away from their parents out of that and taking that right away. I guess I don't know who determines that that's a right to parent, but working with these families and working with these young parents and offering them, maybe as a part of our social programs, parenting is a part of that program, so that we have these kids are here already. These people are parents. Let's help them succeed so that they can be positive parts of our communities rather than negative parts.
I want to go on that too and say, when you go bad parenting, that can be on all levels, not even in the poor neighborhoods. You know, you look at it on the higher, you know, the ones with more money, that with their kids, when their kids on drugs and doing this, is that bad parenting? Do we consider that bad parenting? Because they got money, so it's okay for their kids to act off? You know, it's on a different level of where it comes back to race, you know, because I got a poor black kid who's acting off, the parent is fault. But I got a rich kid who's acting off, it's not the parent, it's the kid. So, you know, if we're going to look at bad parenting, We have to look at it on each and every level. You know, not just on where it's up, this kid, single family home, mom ain't around or dad ain't around. I know how it is, and I'll go with Jason of saying, I grew up in a single family home, and I respect my mom to the fullest, because my mom did the best she could, and I say she did a real good job, you know, and it's with a lot of these kids, you know, whereas when you ask them, what, do your mama know what you're doing? I don't call my mom. You know, it's a lot of them out here there that's doing that. So when we look at wanting to take the kid out of the home, you look at it on each and every level, that whereas a lot of kids will be missing a home.
I guess my response to that question has to do with what the person who wrote the question, what do they think is in place of these families that these kids will be taken away from? I have worked alongside systems do not make good parents. Foster care does not make a good parent. Juvenile detention does not make a good parent. When a kid is a ward of the state, that is one of the most toxic things I've ever seen, when everyone that they come in contact with are paid to take care of them. That is not an alternative to parents who are struggling with their parenting skills. I think this last question goes back to the first question. And where is our community at? Where is the church community? Where is the library community? Where are the extended family and friends like family? Where are the other people who are willing to step in and step up to help protect and guide and advise not only the child in this family, but also the parent in that? If you know that that's a teenage mom, I'm also the product of a single teenage mother. But all four of my siblings and I are college educated, and my mama did that by herself, and with an extended network of people who supported her because she was young and didn't know a lot of things. And so I think we need to think about, where is our community at, not snatching babies away from mothers or away from homes and families, but where is the rest of the community at?
Yeah. I mean, that's basically my only comment was going to be that it is, I think, another systemic issue, right? It's looking at every piece of the child's family and looking at, how is that parented, right? They might not have an example of great parenting in their own experience, and so they're making it up as they go along. And so how do we create role models for parents to look to? A lot of the kids that I worked with in particular that had interest in going to college couldn't do it because they didn't know very simple things about, seemingly simple, right, to somebody like me who knew the system, like about college applications. Like, you don't know the facts about how to apply for college, like, because nobody in your family has done it before. Like, you're going to be the first one. You have a good academic record, but you don't know how to do it. And so little things like that, where a community could come in and say, hey, this kid has an opportunity to go to college, but let's just help you fill out your forms. Like things like that, where it could be a very, one sit-down thing that could solve that problem and stop that kid from going in a totally different direction, to a gang or something else. But trying to find ways to help people, and then thinking about economic opportunities for families so that, a single mom doesn't have to work 10 hours a day. And, I think there's all kinds of issues that play into it.
Okay. Are there any other questions from the audience before we begin to wrap this up? I know that our time is limited here. Yes, ma'am.
How did the Rondo community develop more resources than we have here on the east side?
So the question is, how did the Rondo community develop more resources than we have on the east side?
Well, I'm not from here, but I can tell
I'm
you
a product of the Rondo community.
I can tell you-
Go ahead. Anybody?
I think with the Rondo community, it's been there for a long time. And it was a community, and everybody knew everybody, and everybody pitched in for those resources to help other people in the community. I think with the east side, it's a very transient population. People and families are moving all the time. So it's real hard to get to those resources because they are moving. And until we figure out how to, in Ramsey County and St. Paul, we are very resource rich. There are a lot of things out there, like somebody said earlier, but it's how do we access them? How do we get those resources to the kids? Until we figure that out, you know, we're gonna have some of those issues. And I think with this community center up here being a start, because it does offer a library, it does offer, you know, after-school programs, it's things like that where kids will know where to turn to access those resources.
Thank you. Other, yes.
The Randall community also is a perfect example of what a community is. My parents, my mom, my aunts and uncles, my mom has 10 brothers and sisters, all from that area, and just even an example of 94 coming in and dividing their neighborhood, and how they stuck together, and how, like, for instance, my uncle was really out in the streets, but he became activist because he believes so much into his community that he did a lot of firsts. Because community was really, I mean, first of all, our family was huge, but every time I hear stories, it's like they were a family, and they were, I mean, just like a perfect example of what a community is. They know each other. I can go somewhere in a store and someone say, your mom must be, or you must come from this family, and having never met that person before, but because they're just so active, you know, like there are a lot of activists in that community. And also the whole transient thing. I hear of a lot of East Side pride, and when I hear that though, just in all honesty, I usually hear it from the white community and not a lot of people of color. Where over in the Rondo area, when you talk about even white people there, but also that black population was really close. And you know, everybody knew everyone. My mom would tell me how somebody would get in trouble, and just like someone mentioned earlier, all the way home it was, I heard about what happened, all the way home. So I think that's why.
Okay, thank you. Other questions before I have the panel wrap up? Yes, sir.
Not so much a question, as an observation. In 2007, after our 2 violent rapes here, right close to where we are right now, I started a community watch program over here and organized it on a grid basis. I don't know how many of you know what grids are in St. Paul, but I know police officers know what grids are. A grid is a small town. It's not a neighborhood, it's not a block. It's like a small town, it's about 30-some blocks, that varies. I went out there to observe the balance between the police on one side of the balance and citizens on the other side of the balance. And it was a 5-year study, and I wanted to just see how this balance was working. And 5 years later, in 2012, when I officially stopped the program, my conclusion was that the citizens in this part of town, and pretty much the citizens in our country, have retreated off of the streets, out of their neighborhoods, into their fenced backyards, and into their houses, because the whole world was right there at their fingertips. And in 5 years out on the street, I was out there 3 nights a week, Thursday, Friday, Saturday night, from usually just before dark, and then maybe until midnight, 1 or 2 in the morning, and just to observe, to not get involved, to not really participate, and the citizens are totally absent, basically. They're not out there. They're not out there really in the daytime. So if we've got a problem in this country, it's the retreat of the citizens from the community. Only 38% of them vote now. So the problem is right here in this room. I don't know why I went out there other than the second rape, which was only a few blocks from our house. Something in my gut told me I should go out onto the street. And so it was a 5-year learning program out there on the street. I had a really good friend, St. Paul police officer, who quietly would advise me out there at night, but no one in that 5 years, only 3 people volunteered to ride with me in our own community watch squad car. One of them was too mentally ill to be safe in the car. One of them, who was a physician, but who owned a partial interest in a martial arts studio, thought he could beat up everyone that crossed his path, so he wasn't a candidate to ride with me. The other one was a former employee of Ramsey County, and he was so angry at government that I finally couldn't have him with me. So for 5 years, I was all alone out there, or 4 years actually. I walked the first year, but 4 years I was alone in our squad car. It's a really nice car, I love it dearly, but no one volunteered. No one felt anything in their gut. Come out and get in that right seat and sit and ride very quietly, drove the alleys repeatedly, sat and watched and listened repeatedly. So the citizens failed miserably.
So I think it just speaks to the fact that we have work to do.
But we have to like digest that. I don't think the problem is in this room. I mean, he said a lot of different things, but some people don't have the time to volunteer. We are ambassadors. We get paid. We can go out there and be out there fully active. I think that's one research study. And you can skew data or play with data however you like. But I think that deserves a further conversation because I don't think the people in here are the problem. I think we have systems that create problems. And we would be remiss if we didn't acknowledge that. We have failed schools. We have failed policies. We have so many different things. If you look up here, to figure out who created this reality on this east side, it wouldn't be the people who are in this room.
Yeah. And so
we'll talk further. But
because what I would say to you on that is, if it is to be, it begins with me, and it will take each one of us to be invested in that. And you're right, we could probably talk about this all day long, but we're going to wrap this up. And I just want to make certain that there isn't another question before I pose my final question to the committee. Yes, sir.
I have a comment. I did not read the book before coming and participating. I think the panel did an excellent job. But I would be interested in knowing if there's anyone that have not read the book that would be interested in meeting here at the library to read the book as a group.
So there is a challenge for anyone who has not read the book to come together as a book group to discuss, to read and discuss the book. I think okay, all right, okay. And so we end with our community, our children, our concern, and our commitment. And lastly, our collective hope. So I'm going to ask each one of you, and I'm going to save Kekla for last, okay, to just give me briefly your hope. Okay, Marjorie.
Young people from the community that Kekla wrote about are some of the most powerful, insightful, resilient human beings I have ever met. I think that I have taken as much from young people in my years as a youth worker as I have given. And I think that we need to realize that they are our future and are worth our investment.
Thank you. Salim?
My hope is that we become more compassionate as we try and steer our way through some really, really tough times. My hope is that we persevere, and my hope is that we're open-minded to learning more about our evolving society. And if we do those things, my hope is that we can start to become more of a collectivistic community rather than an individualistic community.
Thank you. Mark?
I would like to see, or hope that we become a community again, where people know their neighbors. Will talk to people that are walking down the street, that are in the community, that businesses are willing to come into communities that are owned locally. So everybody knows everybody. Everybody understands what's going on in the families. Just so you can build, it becomes a strong, strong community. It provides opportunities for young kids to see that there's more than just, little things or just the small part of the city. That they can grow and see that there's other things out there than just, the east side, that there's St. Paul, that there's a Minnesota, that there's a country. Just to keep on growing and seeing that there's more to life than just right here.
Well, my hope is that we would take a more true vested interest in our young people. And I also hope that we can come to some common ground and have an understanding that this is our east side, not anybody's individually, but our east side.
Thank you. Timmy?
My hope is that, especially over here on Payne in Maryland, that we come from out of our gates and our yards and start reaching out to these young people. Just really get to know who they are, so then they know who you are. So then when something do happen, like we said, get back to the community base. That's what I hope around here.
Thank you, Tim. Jason?
My hope is that we can have more of these discussions, that it's just not, during Black History Month or, at this point or this period in time. I think we need these discussions almost every day if we want to get through it. Also, I think we need to get to a place where we can just love each other without knowing anything about each other. Just because I can look you in your eyes and just say, man, I love you, just because we're sharing space at the same time, in the same era and time. Like, I don't know anything about you. I don't know what you do, but I love you anyway. I think when we can get to that place, I think we won't even have all of these issues, but just loving each other just because you're a person and you exist. So that's my hope.
Kekla.
All right. Well, my hope for this book in particular was that it would spark dialogue, and not the same kind of dialogue that we see in the media, but a different and hopefully slightly deeper dialogue, and a dialogue that included young voices, which is something that I was not seeing in the media overall. I think there are several layers to this. One is that, by giving readers the opportunity to experience the book and come to their own conclusion, that, as I was saying, is an empowering thing. One of the things that I teach when I'm teaching young writers in particular and young readers is to trust your own voice and to believe in your choices. And one of the things that I hear a lot in talking about youth activism and talking about responses to racism and sort of the social justice movement that we see happening here, is that so much of it is taking place online. So much of it is individuals in their space, and that young people aren't sort of out in the world and being active. I had an interesting interaction with a classroom of teens a couple of months ago talking about this book, and the teacher asked me, well, what can we do to get youth out in the world and talking about these issues and really protesting and demonstrating and doing positive work in their communities. And one of the teens raised her hand really fast to respond to this before I even had a chance, and she says one of the reasons why she feels teens go to the internet, and maybe people in general go to the internet, is that they feel like, I have followers there. Somebody's going to hear what I say when I go there. When I tweet, I know that my 100 people are going to see that, and I'm going to be heard in that space, where I don't feel like I'm being heard in the real world, like out in the world, and in the community, and in the media, and even in necessarily in the school, or in the spaces that they occupy in the real world, but they feel like they're being heard online. And so I hoped that a book like this would allow people, young people in particular, a space to talk about issues in the real world, and to talk about issues with people who are a safe space for them. I believe that as a librarian or a teacher or a police officer or a community worker, like, if you take this book and you give it to a kid and you say, hey, here's this book that I enjoyed, it's about some stuff that's going on in our community, let me know what you think, right? I feel like you become a safe space for that person to share their voice. And I think that as soon as we can give people opportunities to share their voice, that we will we will have a greater community, we will have a better dialogue, and we will hopefully be able to resolve some of these issues in the long run. So my hope is in some sense being realized here tonight by having this conversation and having a room full of people that came out to talk about the book and to talk about these issues. And so I could not be happier to have been here and participated in this. Thank you so much.
And let's give our panel a round of applause. Thank you. I know we've got some time set aside for book signing. I want to say thank you to the St. Paul Public Library, St. Paul Public Schools, to all of the sponsors, but more importantly, I want to say thank you to you. For those of you that are 21 and over, thank you. But even more importantly, for those of you that are under 21 as a high school principal, you need to let me know who your principal is so I can call them and tell them that you deserve some extra credit.
That's
because of being here. Being here, being present, being attentive, you know, it is about you. And so I just want to say thank you to all our young people. Have a good evening.